right, great. Thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Nitesh Sanjani. I am an O'Reilly author, frequent speaker at Information Security Briefings, and I'm currently Senior Manager at Ernst & Young's advisory practice with emphasis on information security. Now, if you look at the title slide on display here, you will notice sentences scrolling in the background. This background is really a video screenshot of a website called Twistory, which is really an art form that goes about collecting sentences from social media channels that begin with the words, I love, I hate, I think, I believe, I feel, I wish. In other words, sentences that describe feelings of individuals. So my interest in the collection of feelings or sentiments from social media channels will become apparent in this presentation as we move along. So in this presentation, we will take a look at some of the risks and advantages of online social media applications from a security and privacy perspective. We will start by looking at some of the obvious risks, but I won't dwell on the obvious much. In this presentation, I want to try and offer up my thoughts on, number one, risks that are less obvious, yet subliminal. In fact, these risks are often, I think, more impactful than the obvious issues on privacy. And number two, risks that are difficult to mitigate because they arise from the core definition of use cases of social applications. So in fact, if you think about it, the concept of social privacy is really an oxymoron. You really cannot expect to come off as social and maintain your privacy at the same time. It's kind of like showing up at a cocktail party and standing in a corner. So, by now you're probably wondering where the word Psychotronica comes from. The word psychotronic was coined during the Cold War when there was a conspiracy and rumors going around that Russia had a technology to manufacture a magical and powerful wireless gun that they could point towards people and read and influence their thoughts. Of course, we don't believe that this was or is true, but I was inspired by this concept of psychotronic because today, it is a reasonable hypothesis to suggest that individual feelings can be somewhat mined and evaluated by capturing the sentiments they express on social media spaces. And once you are able to capture a dashboard of an individual's sentiments over time, you may gain a holistical understanding of their thoughts and processes, allowing you to abuse the information for social engineering and manipulation tactics. We will get on to this concept in later slides, but if you were wondering, this is the origin of the title of the talk. So, I'm quite aware that this is an O'Reilly webcast, and I'm quite likely preaching to the choir, but allow me to do my due diligence. Before we get started, let us briefly discuss why social media is highly relevant in these times. Today there are approximately 1.3 billion people online. 1 out of 4 people online today leverage social media applications. If you add up the amount of time spent by everyone on social applications today, it roughly amounts to 3 billion man-minutes per day. That is an astounding figure. So that gives us some perspective on how important social media channels are today and how they're changing the way we communicate and collaborate with each other. The Generation Y culture, loosely defined as the new generation that is entering the workforce today, has not known a world without gadgets and technology. And I think this is a special group that we will look at as we think about the privacy implications and the security implications of social media. So as we'll see in this presentation, both victims and even criminals online are increasingly falling under the Generation Y category themselves as time progresses. So now that we have established why social media is important, let's jump right in. So Facebook is one of the more important social networking applications today, one of the more popular. So let us take a look at what a typical Facebook profile looks like and the information people share in their Facebook profiles. From political views to religious views to detailed information about their careers, the activities they indulge in, interests, favorite music, favorite movies, books, and other additional information. All of this can be found on a typical Facebook user's profile. Now, of course, the obvious implication here is privacy. But one of the other important points to note about social profiles is that they are what is called outward identity claims. That is, when people construct their social profiles, they're psychologically aware that their profile is to be viewed by external parties. So think of a situation when you enter somebody's office. If that person has his or her family pictures or diplomas facing you, the visitor, then those are outward identity claims, because the owner of these items, the person who the office belongs to, never really looks at these items. They're placed in their locations for you, the visitor, and it is possible to tell a lot about a person based on these outward identity claims. So someone's Facebook profile picture, for example, may signify the individual as someone who has traveled a lot. That may not be necessarily true, but the fact that the individual wants to be perceived as such, when measured with the truth value of what is being portrayed, can yield important information about that person. All right, also pay attention to groups and networks that individuals join on Facebook, for example, can also portray a lot about them. The information on social spaces can in turn be used by external parties for manipulation by way of social engineering. The point here is that all this biographical information, in addition to the psychological information that you can derive out of a simple thing like a Facebook profile, has not been available in the past. I mean, if this was, say, 5 years ago, and you wanted to find out all of this information about a given person without knowing him or her, it would be very difficult to do so. But today, it is not that difficult. And know the counter-argument that you have to be a friend on someone on Facebook to see this information really does not reduce the risk or impact, because there are elementary ways around it, such as joining the same geographical network as the target, or creating a fake profile of someone else he or she knows and then adding them. So another side effect of the information being volunteered on social applications is that traditional authentication mechanisms are decreasing in value. Here is the Forgot My Password page for someone's Windows Live email account or Hotmail. If you guess this person's secret question, which is, which school did I study in, you get access to his email account or her email account. The answer to this question, in addition to all the other location information you need to solve to reset this target's password, is available, in this case, on the target's Facebook page. And I want to jump to a case study I was able to perform on LinkedIn with permission from a friend of mine, and we will call him Jack. I signed up on LinkedIn as Jack. I noticed that Jack had not signed up on LinkedIn. And I signed up as Jack on LinkedIn, and I did only one thing after that. I sent a connection request to John, who I knew was Jack's friend. As soon as John accepted my LinkedIn request, other people who knew Jack and John noticed that Jack was now on LinkedIn. And within a matter of minutes, I had incoming requests from other people who knew Jack to get LinkedIn. In fact, some of the LinkedIn requests had some interesting information about Jack, such as, hey Jack, I know it looks like you're going to be in New York on Monday, let's have lunch, and so on. Now, after a period of about 2 days, you can tell Jack is a popular person, I had 88 connections in Jack's profile. Now, keep in mind that I am not Jack, I'm somebody posing as Jack. Now, of course, the obvious privacy implication here is that I am stealing Jack's identity online. But there's more to it than that. And that is what my aim here is to call out. If Jack is a consultant, for example, his address book is very important to him. In a consulting lifestyle, we have clients on which we bid our work and engagements on, we respond to proposals. If you are my competitor and you want to know who the point of contact is that I'm working with at a particular client, and you know that I have only recently won a particular consulting engagement, you can watch my LinkedIn behavior, and the fact that I have added person X who works at client Y in a period of last 10 days, you can put forth a reasonable hypothesis as a competitor, so that is my point of contact. When you see another case study to think about is when a company cuts a bonus check and you see somebody adding 3 or 4 recruiters on LinkedIn, that person is probably looking for a job. Another good example is if Company A and Company B are rumored to be in talks about a merger or a business acquisition, and if you notice people from Company A and Company B linking in with each other at a threshold, at a ratio that exceeds prior known thresholds, you can put forth the hypothesis that the merger is probably true. So what I'm calling out here is not just the face value of privacy, but the additional subliminal information that can be captured from social media spaces. So let's jump to Twitter, because I think from a security and privacy perspective, Twitter is extremely interesting because of the microblogging channel it exposes. There are lots of important people on Twitter today, and I have a few political examples here. The thing to note is, I'm not sure if you can see it, but in the red circles, you can also see the actual devices these individuals are using to tweet. So John McCain, for example, likes to use text messaging. We have another politician who likes to use his Twitterberry app, so he's probably using Twitter. Now, all of this information can be great for an attacker if, I know there is a buffer overflow or an exploit for Twitterberry. If I send a certain payload, that is good information for me to know. But I think that the bigger point here is that on face value, some of this may not look like a big deal. For example, if you have a politician talking about, him or her about to give a press conference, well, that's probably public news anyway, so what's the big deal? The big deal here could be the situation where, as a malicious entity, in the past it's been very difficult for a malicious person to, get a dashboard of where a collection of important people are at a given amount of time. So the malicious use case I'm proposing that we need to watch out for is things like, it's possible to write an automated script that uses the Twitter API and then mashes up the location information with Google Maps API. And so now you have a different view of the same amount of collection of data, where I can now view where all the targets are physically at a given amount of time. So I think the consciousness I'm trying to raise here is, sometimes it is not just the one Twitter message, but it's the holistical viewpoint that people are able to capture now that they have not been in the past. And of course, there's one of the obvious implications also is, what happens when Barack Obama's Twitter account gets hacked, which it has been in the past. In fact, I had found that Twitter's SMS system was vulnerable to SMS caller ID spoofing in 2007, I believe. And so, in other words, if I knew your cell phone number and you had associated with your Twitter account, I could then send a Twitter message as you. Today, that would mean a big deal. When you have people and powerful individuals with hundreds of thousands or millions of followers, even sending out a malicious Twitter message that is politically charged, or even, a link that, you get 1 million people to click on simultaneously, which exploits a browser vulnerability, is a big deal. Here's one interesting example. We have a congressman who the Secret Service was really trying to protect his whereabouts as they guided him into Iraq, while at the same time he pulls out his BlackBerry and Twitters and tells the world where he is. So the Secret Service really, of course, did not like that. But the point I'm trying to put forth here is, when you have individuals with mobile devices and critical situations like this, how do you contain the data leakage? And I think that is an interesting question and an interesting problem. Twitter and Bombay. Last year, as everyone probably knows, that Bombay was subject to a terrorist attack, and to me personally, that was something that was interesting because I was born in Bombay. And while I was in my apartment in Seattle, I turned on the news trying to keep up with what was going on. I think it was an interesting case too because it was a prolonged attack, an attack of 2 days, not merely a couple of minutes or seconds or hours. And as I tried to keep up with what was going on in Bombay, I turned to Twitter to keep up with what was going on, what the news stories were being published, and I noticed that the conversations that were going on, if you just search for Mumbai or Bombay and search twitter.com, I was seeing about approximately 6 Twitter messages per second on the topic. This was last year. Twitter has become a lot more popular now, but this was last year. Everything from individuals like me who were abroad and concerned about what was going on, or individuals who had opposing political viewpoints. But most interestingly, and I think that's what I want to talk about in the next few slides, are individuals who were on the scene, taking pictures and responding to people who were remote through Twitter. And we call them citizen journalists. I think they were doing a great job, but I want to put forth a few interesting use cases in the next few slides. So, coming back to the Generation Y point, in fact, most, if not all, of the terrorists that were captured in the Bombay attacks were probably fall in the Generation Y category. They were all below the age of, I believe they're in their early 30s or below, and they were found to be using Blackberries and Google Maps and so on. So these were technically savvy people or individuals. And one of the points I want to make is, as in the future, attacks like these, it's more likely that the individuals, the malicious individuals perpetrating these attacks, are likely to be technology savvy as well. So the other point I'm trying to make here is, while the attacks were going on, we had one individual who was a neighbor of a building where the commandos were, physically landing on top of the rooftop to try and rescue the people in that building. And this individual, who was a neighbor of this building, was taking pictures of the commandos landing and then putting it on his Flickr page and tweeting about it to act as a citizen journalist. Now, as people were asking him questions and detailed questions, this individual was fairly active. He was responding back to any questions anybody had. Now, I am not suggesting at all that in the case of Bombay that the terrorists were watching Twitter. But the point I'm trying to suggest is, in the future, should attacks like these occur, especially in grounds that are, developed countries, there is the potential abuse case scenario where an accomplice who is remote during prolonged attacks can leverage information from citizen journalists. It is something we need to think about. I don't mean to raise undue alarm, but there's something we need to think about. So in this case, what the abuse case would have been is, for an accomplice who's communicating with the terrorists to go back to this guy and to Twitter him back and say, how many commandos do you really see? Do you see, 6 or do you see 8? And this individual would have been, fairly likely to respond back with that information, all the while where the authorities are trying to stop this information from getting to the malicious entities. Another interesting thing I noticed during the Bombay attacks was this Twitter message that came out. JJ Hospital needs A- type blood urgently. Please call Ashwin at this number if you can donate. And as soon as I saw that, I thought it was a beautiful thing. And I did follow up on this, and this hospital actually did get blood from a lot of people who were watching Twitter. So that is a beautiful thing. The abuse case I'm thinking about here is if somebody wanted to be malicious, he or she could have taken that. And by the way, this message spread the Twitterverse by people who retweeted that message. So think about a abuse case where somebody were to take that Twitter message and retweet it with a different phone number. that would almost poison the rescue effort and destroy the whole idea behind the rescue effort, which in turn could cause undue panic. So these are the sorts of things I think we need to start pondering and be prepared for abuse cases that may seem unlikely today, but are probabilistically should not be. We should all not be surprised if some of these things do occur. In fact, just to put forth the point of how this is so important is, there was a Twitter message that came out during the Bombay attacks where somebody randomly said something like, "Oh my God, the terrorists are watching Twitter," and there was no evidence for that, but the BBC takes that and publishes it as fact, and then later retracts that story and apologizes. So you can see how much of a thing like the microblogging channel like Twitter has influence over real journalism today. I want to take some of this and also present in a good light on how Twitter can be leveraged for the good. In fact, today, comparatively to journalism, Twitter is probably the best source for breaking news. You have these two examples here of recent plane crashes or in the U.S., where these were, on the left you see, this individual was actually in the Continental airplane that skidded off the runway, and he was twittering right after it skidded off the runway. You can do better than that when it comes to breaking news. I mean, by the time the fact that the plane, crash landed made to the news, it was barely a matter of minutes, but you have this individual tweeting in seconds because he was on the scene. He was in the plane. And so I want to kind of turn this around and show a different viewpoint on how Twitter can be leveraged. So imagine you're the Secret Service, and you are protecting Barack Obama as he travels from the White House all the way to Times Square, New York. If you start looking at the Twitter public feed, and either by looking at the GPS, the geotagging that some of the clients help tag along with the Twitter message, or just do even keyword analysis, and start looking at messages or Twitter messages that are being sent in the geolocation where the president is. And in this situation, if you are the Secret Service and the president is in Manhattan, and there are 10 people if there are 10 people who have recently Twittered, the word smoke or running in the past 30 seconds, somebody, if you're a Secret Service, you should probably look at that. So I think what I'm suggesting here is the viewpoint that the social media channels like Twitter can be leveraged as an entire platform to assist in physical security issues. Now I want to jump into something that is traditionally called link analysis. So I'm taking the idea of link analysis and applying it to social channels. Now my prior research, if you're interested in it, is a presentation that I've done at the Black Hat conferences. It's called Bat Sushi, Beating Fishers at Their Own Game. Now in that presentation research, I went about scouring the underground message boards, talking to fishers, hanging out where they communicate with each other and so on. So if you look at the top two white boxes with text in them, that's a message board posting from one individual who is, selling stolen credit card numbers on the web. And I noticed that this one individual had, particular handle on the message board, and he had the same handle on 10 different message boards where he was posting the same thing, selling stolen credit card numbers for a fee. Now, in one of the message boards, I noticed that he had mistakenly, and if you click on his profile details, entered his personal Yahoo Instant Messenger handle in one of his profile details. On his other 9 handles, he had used a separate Yahoo Messenger handle, IM handle for the scam he's portraying here, but on one of them he made that mistake of using his personal one. And just by having captured the personal Yahoo chat, his Yahoo ID, I was able to connect his scam artist life that you see on the top of the X with his personal life. So I actually found the guy. I'll just say that he works somewhere in Canada. So now, at the bottom, you can actually see his social profile on a dating site where it's talking about the kind of girl he's looking to date. On the left, you can see his baby picture. On the right, you can actually see him standing in front of his dad's house. And so the concept here is that by way of link analysis on social spaces, it almost becomes very difficult to hide who you really are. A tiny slip-up can reveal your true identity if you are trying to circumvent people from knowing who you really are. Now, you can actually go further. I was showing this case study to a friend of mine, and she asked me, well, how do you really know you got the right guy? Because you're making a fairly bold claim here. Now, you can actually apply textual analysis on top of this. If you look at the three red rectangles on the top of the screen, you know that this individual has the habit of eating his eyes. So, a lot of people do that. So, when they begin their sentences, they'll say, am feeling good, or am this, am that, instead of I am. And you notice he does the exact same thing in his dating profile below. He eats his eyes. So that, increases the chances that we've probably got the right guy. So having talked about link analysis, I also wanted to, now, I just want to put forth the point that link analysis is really a way to derive intelligence from social spaces than what is immediately apparent. And the next subject does the same thing. It's called influence analysis. The concepts of link analysis and influence analysis have been known in investigations for a long period of time. All I'm doing here is showing the powerful nature of how these can be used in social spaces. So influence analysis. I ran this, this app called the Friend Wheel on my Facebook profile, and I apologize in advance if you can see the slide really well. But this is really a network graph of what my friends look like, without actually labeling for each dot represents a friend, but without even knowing the names of each of those dots. My point here is you can tell a lot about my social network or my connections just by looking at this graph. For instance, the first thing you see is that the graph on the top is disconnected from the graph at the bottom. So what would you say about that? You'd probably say, well, maybe the graph on the top is his collection of friends from work, professional friends, and collection at the bottom is people who are probably his family or friends. And you would be right in saying that. You will also, if you look at the bottom set of dots, and you count the amount of the amount of lines protruding from one of the dots at the bottom, they outnumber every other dot. And so what that basically means is that individual is highly influential to me because that individual knows a lot of my friends. And so that person may be socially more closer to me than all the other dots, and you'll be right in saying that too. And so the point I'm trying to make is just by looking at the graph of network connections, there is a way to derive a lot of information about a given person, and I want to jump to a case study illustrating that point. This case study is based on, I was going through a random Associated Press article about a couple that was arrested for not taking good care, let's just say that, of a child that they had custody over. And I noticed that this couple, that both of them had MySpace profiles, and both of them were connected to each other on MySpace. So I asked myself this question. Let me kind of change the real case study, the real scenario, to the following. Let's assume in this case that the couple was in trouble for, let's assume the couple was in trouble, which they were, for not taking care of the child that they had custody over. But let's also assume that investigators were only able to find the identity of one of the spouses, and we're still looking for who the other person is. Could I, if I were an investigator, use the first persons in the couple, first one of the spouses' MySpace profile to kind of tell with a high degree of probability who the other person, who the other accomplice is or was. And so in order to kind of do this case study, what I did is the first person that was, of the couple that was arrested, one of them, her MySpace profile handle was KC. So what I did is I went to KC's MySpace page and I drew a graph of all her friends. And so, when you draw a graph of somebody's friends on MySpace and you kind of look at it and you get a star graph and you say, well, that looks really noisy. How in the world am I ever going to derive any intelligence from this? Well, you can, because the next step that I was able to perform is I went to each one of KC's friends, like IDK on the top right, I'm real on the top left, and, noted who else does I'm real and IDK know that KC also knows. And I did that for all of KC's friends. And so what I ended up was with a graph like this, right? So IDK, for example, knows 3 friends that are also in KC's list. And so you can see that by the black dotted lines. And therefore, the connection between KC, or the influence between KC and IDK is stronger than the connection between KC and Snoopy, for example, because Snoopy does not know any of KC's other friends. And so the third step I performed here was I took out a lot of the noise, I took out all the weaker links, and I ended up with a graph that looks like this, where Prince EC was the most highly influential to KC based on the network graph. And in this case, Prince EC was KC's spouse. But the point I'm trying to make here is not, you could come back to me and say, well, I probably got lucky in this one case study, and I may have. But the point I'm trying to make is, from an investigation's perspective, we spend so much money, when we have an accomplice out there that we want to know who this person's identity is, and actually having law enforcement agents drive to, the actual captured parties' house, ask them questions and interview their neighbors and things like that, which also costs a lot of money. And so from an investigation's point of view, if one of the people that is captured, or if a suspect is out there, there may be some leverage in actually looking at the public data that they've put forth for investigations. Now, one of the other things I would want you to note is when we talk about link analysis and now influence analysis, I'm putting forth some specific viewpoints and specific scenarios. But feel free to extrapolate, and you can take influence analysis and apply it to other things than investigations. You can apply it to a business use case, for example. If you were thinking about writing a Facebook application for a business, and if legal things aside, people who add your Facebook application, Facebook API allows you to spider the network graph, and you can perform similar influence analysis algorithms to derive the information that you really need that may not be immediately apparent. So my point is, don't get stuck on the specific use cases I'm using, but feel free to extrapolate these ideas for anything else that you may find interesting. One other point I want to jump into, which you could probably tell from the beginning of my presentation is my favorite, is sentiment analysis, or actually capturing people's feelings. Because in addition to the information that people are exposing on social media channels, the subliminal information that people are exposing are the feelings. The website you're seeing now is called another work of art. It's called wefeelfine.org. If you go to that website, you'll see it's a beautiful work of art. It scours the social web and finds sentences that express the word, that use the word feel, and and it expresses and portrays these feelings in wonderful graphical format. So having been inspired by this work of art, I kind of asked myself, well, from a security and privacy perspective, can people abuse this? Now, instead of thinking of this as a work of art, what if I target one particular person who is quite active on the social media channel, and what are the abuse cases that come out of this? And of course, my reasoning for doing thinking like this and the other things I've talked about in this presentation is because I think from a security and privacy perspective, we can only protect ourselves and know what we should do and what we should not do if we understand the abuse cases. So in order to illustrate the powerful nature of sentiment analysis, I'm going to show you a proof of concept tool that I developed that is also based on a particular real case study. But now this case study is based on an individual who actually really had a real criminal history. He was arrested a couple of times, out on bail, and I noticed that he had a MySpace profile. Now, I noticed he had a MySpace profile after where he committed the real crime that I'm going to talk about. So this individual had a well-known criminal history, mentally unstable. He spent quite an amount of time on his MySpace profile talking about his relationship with his spouse, not in a good way, using profanity. If you were to read his blogs, you could tell that this person needs help. But you could say that about a lot of other people on MySpace. So, coming back to this individual, he did that for a good period of a couple of 9 months or 6 months or so. And then one fine day, he writes a blog entry about his relationship with his spouse, but portrays himself as the victim, does not use as many profanity words, sounds a little bit more stable. So if you actually look at the set of words he used prior months compared to this one blog entry that suddenly came out of nowhere, and you were to classify the words that he was using in the past, his words in the past signified a very angry sentiment. But in his new blog entry that was so different than his other blog entries on the same topic, he used words that sound happy, that sound more put him more on a slightly better intellectual route than he had been in the past. And as soon as he initiated this one blog entry, 3 days later, he steps into his house, unfortunately, kills his family and then commits suicide. So as soon as this Associated Press article came out, one of the things I noticed is that his MySpace page was still active for a period of 2 or 3 weeks before MySpace took it down. And having captured all the information from his blogs, I said, can I, as an investigator, kind of run through the words he has been using in all these past couple of months and actually find that deviance, that in the past 3 days he actually purposefully blogged using a sentiment of happy-sounding words, and can I actually use that in my investigation? So if you go to We Feel Fine in the FAQ section, I believe, or the methodology section, they actually give you a spreadsheet of 1,000 words that are commonly used to express feelings. And so I went through those 1,000 words, and for each of those words, I signified them as either happy or yellow in color, sad or blue in color, or angry or red in color. And what you're going to see is a proof of concept sentiment analysis dashboard tool that runs through this individual's MySpace profile over time. So on the top you'll see a line graph that tends upwards as happy words are found, and downwards when sad or angry words are located in time, and below which you'll see a bar graph that is either red for angry, blue for sad, or yellow for happy. That's a culmination of all the average feelings that are collected. And finally, below you'll see a word tag, a word cloud, where as these words are being collected that express feelings, they grow in size the more frequently they're used. Now, I've kind of taken the video screenshot that I'm about to show you and moved it down a bit, so I've censored some of the word tags because I don't want to offend anybody on this call with some of the language that was being used. So you can see in time, this individual sentiment is forever tending downwards. And the overall sentiment is blue, which is sad. It's not a happy sentiment. And this goes on, the downward trending goes on for a significant period of time. Now you'll notice at the end now, the yellow dots that are picking up, that was his last blog entry, right? So I think what I'm suggesting here is and you can see his overall sentiment, just by that one last blog entry, changes his average sentiment to happy. And so you can kind of sense the deviation in sentiment here by this one blog entry that is highly deviant from his other blog entries in a period of time. So what I'm suggesting here is if I were an investigator that came across the scene after the fact, if this individual has a active social profile, my point is that should also, and that is public, maybe that should also be used for investigations. The traditional investigation methodology is to try to figure out, why this person committed this crime, but I think we are overlooking some of the evidence that is present on social spaces. And of course, there are legal issues that may prevent authorities from using or leveraging that, but I'm not a lawyer. So, again, I've illustrated the powerful nature of sentiment analysis for one specific case study. Now, you can, take sentiment analysis and also think about from a business perspective and how people or a particular business can abuse or leverage sentiment analysis. And I want to show you that the same concept in a different light, from a business light. I'm not sure how many of you remember that Microsoft last year paid Jerry Seinfeld reportedly $10 million to star in a couple of commercials with Bill Gates. And, these commercials were highly regarded, and when they came out, what I did is I watched Twitter and performed a similar sentiment analysis to see how people actually felt about these commercials and how this was affecting Microsoft's brand. Because at the end of the day, if you're a business, you can leverage the same idea of sentiment analysis to see if your marketing dollars that you're spending is helping your brand or not helping your brand. And so as I ran through the exact same concept for the sentiment around the Jerry Seinfeld ads, you can see when the first ad came out, that was not good for the Microsoft brand because a lot of people were confused. Nobody understood what these commercials actually were trying to portray. And if you watch any of these commercials, you probably know what I'm talking about. And so, when the first commercial came out, you can see that, there was negative sentiment, the first drop, and then you can see that the brand starts to recover as people start to forget about the commercial. And, people say good things about Microsoft and things are okay. And then the second commercial comes out, so you can see another significant drop. And if I were somebody at Microsoft responsible for marketing, this would not be a good thing. And then, if you remember, I'm a PC commercials came out for Microsoft. And, of course, I don't know if that commercial in itself was that great, but it was far better. Anything was far better than any of these Jerry Seinfeld commercials. And you can see the sentiment for that was wholly positive. Now, one of the other things to point out is, you're looking at the word cloud. One of the words that was most frequently used to express sentiment for the Microsoft commercial was WTF. And so that tells you a lot if you're the marketing director at Microsoft looking at how well these commercials actually were received and if it helped or hurt the Microsoft brand. So what I want to end with is, hopefully I've put forth some interesting ideas on the subliminal nature of information that can be captured from social media spaces. That may in turn be even more powerful than the face value of the information you're able to capture. For example, if you go to Facebook or LinkedIn, Facebook isn't going to tell you or give you a graph of the person's psychological sentiment. That is up to you to derive out of the social media channel. And some of this information that is subliminal can be extremely powerful for the good or the bad. And so that is my point of this presentation, and one of the great things about this presentation is it opens up wonderful conversations, and I would like to open it up for questions now. But before I do that, one of the other things I do want to kind of disclaim is that this presentation was mainly focused on the security and privacy side, but as an individual outside of my role in the security space, I am a big advocate of social media spaces. So unfortunately, if I do come off as being highly negative on social media channels, that is not true. I'm a big advocate and I'm very enthusiastic about where social media is taking us. I think it's good for our culture. So with that, I will open it up to questions.
That was a fascinating presentation, Nitesh.
Thanks.
Just amazing. So I think we will have some questions. People, feel free to share them. I wanted to ask you about the emotional dashboard that you were showing. That was your own creation. Is that not true?
It is. In fact, I just basically took an RSS feed of that individual's MySpace blog and, created a simple app that churned through the words and created a graph using Microsoft Silverlight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, that was brilliant. It was amazing to watch. And another question, I heard you say that you are an advocate or a fan of social media, which we're all using it. And presentations like this are, one person posted, there's a fine line between, I don't remember her exact words, being careful and being paranoid, and that's very true. So do most of us, individual users like me or the people in this presentation, do we have a lot to worry about, or is it only special cases?
No, I think it is. So I think the sentence you kind of paraphrased there is right on. There is a fine line between being paranoid and being careful. And one of the things I'm trying to put forth is, I'm channeling some of my thoughts from a purely a security professional perspective, and it is my job to be paranoid because that's how I bring value to the table. But I think from a day-to-day perspective, in fact, when my family members ask me how they should behave on social media channels, the only thing I say is just use the rule of thumb you would normally use on the internet, is just know that when you put something out there, it persists and you can't take it back. I think that is a risk that is more real than a lot of the things I'm talking about. A lot of the things I'm talking about are risks, but I think it's something where our culture will learn to live with those risks. For example, the insurance company you probably have for your vehicle probably has a lot more information about you, where they can adjust your premiums than they had in the past, and we just learn to live with that information. And I think you weigh on one end the information that we're putting out there that may be useful in a bad way to somebody. In the end sum of it is that social media is good, and I think the sorts of things I'm putting out there is great to think about, and it may have implications in the way of how culture may be may lead in a specific direction. One of the quick other examples I'll say to illustrate my point there is, today we have a lot of instances where people who are, submit their resume, and then if somebody looks at their MySpace photographs and of being, intoxicated, that we hear about these cases where the people don't eventually get the job.
They wouldn't deserve it if they did that.
Well, that's the sentiment, right? But if you really think about it, a lot of people when they were younger have done that, right? And so there's a double standard in society today that in fact social media is helping elevate. So I think 10 years from now, that individual will probably, the person making the decision on that person's job will be so numb to people sharing their lives on social media that this would not negatively affect that individual. So I think one of the things is today, as the Generation Y is stuck in the double standard world, and I think the more information we share about ourselves will actually help culture and society become more liberal.
Okay, good point. And David's asking if you could repeat once again how you got the name Psychotronica.
Oh, sure. So Psychotronica is really derived from the word psychotronic that was used during the Cold War when there were these rumors passed around that Russia had this psychotronic gun, wireless gun that they could point at any given target and be able to read and influence that person's thought. Of course, I don't believe, or nobody believes, no sane person believes that that technology really existed. But now that we are talking about grabbing or leveraging sentiment remotely by way of social channels, I just use that word as inspiration.
Yeah, I love that idea.
Yeah.
Well, so Tim is asking, can you have a career analyzing social networking data for a company?
I think so. There actually, if you Google it up, and I offer that service in the firm I work for too, from a business perspective, a lot of companies are want to know before a lot of Fortune 50 companies, in fact, before they're about to go to market with a specific new product or service or offering, entertainment or electronic, they want to for example, measure the sentiment of their competitor's brand and learn from that sentiment to know what feature sets to put in their new product. To be able to measure the marketing spend, like in the Microsoft case I illustrated, there is a lot of money being spent today by big firms in order to capture this information for business perspectives. From a security side, I have come across one or two clients of mine who are actually trying to use publicly available information because legally they can't really log into Facebook and friend you and get that information from you. A lot of these, two of my clients who have entertainment campuses all around the world want to leverage some of this information for investigations. For example, if they kick somebody out of their entertainment campus, they want to be able to keep track of that individual if that individual is sharing all this information publicly anyway. So there is a lot of interest and a lot of money, and there's a lot of opportunities in this space. In fact, you'll see a lot of boutique companies that have recently popped up that provide services like this.
That's interesting. So James is asking, you were saying that you thought that, Tim's asking, what should he Google to find jobs like this?
Well, that's a good question. I'll think about that one. I would say, I don't know, sentiment analysis.
Social media analysis?
Yeah, that's a good one.
I would just try a few things, Tim. And so James is asking, you were saying that people would become more used to this in the future, but James is asking, is there a possibility that people will become more cautious and reverse this flow of information? And he said, for instance, there was quite a flare-up over the potential change in Facebook's terms of service. So do you think all of this is, that the sharing of information is as inevitable as it seems?
So the Facebook terms of service thing, I can see why that was a big deal because I am in the technology field and I take seriously anything like that. But I think what I want to do is, and while the conversation was going around about Facebook putting forth this new privacy agreement that nobody really liked, if you actually kind of zoomed out of where the conversation was happening, it was only happening amongst our geeky circle, right? Because we are privacy advocates, we understand technology. Mm-hmm. But if you really talk to the 95 or 98% of the other individuals who are not in technology or not, really care about the privacy implications of of Facebook, a lot of them went on with their life. And if Facebook, I think today, had not reverted back and apologized for that, I think they would have not suffered. There would have been a brand where they would have suffered some brand collateral, but we would be back to normal and people would have forgotten about it. But I think what will happen as people kind of pull back on the information they're sharing, I think we will see that in the same sense that if you kind of think back a couple of years when the concept of blogging first took along, a lot of people went crazy with that and blogged a lot of information about their personal lives, and people learned. And it's like you burn yourself, and everybody learns, and you establish rules of thumbs as you go along. But all I'm trying to say is the rule of thumbs, no matter what we establish, we are never going to get to a point where we're going to prevent the leakage of some of the data sets I talked about, because going back to my original point, you can't be social and private at the same time.
That's an excellent point. That's wonderful. So we're about out of time right now, and I just want to thank you again for this really thought-provoking presentation. I know that we all got a lot out of it. I can tell by the comments. And I also want to remind people again of your book, Hacking the Next Generation. I think that Marcy posted the information about our discount on there. And I'm not trying to be a salesperson, but you saw his presentation. The book is also great. And 40% off is the best discount you can get anywhere. So if you're interested, give it a try. It's good for your entire book purchase from O'Reilly. And enough about that. If you want to keep a copy of the chat transcript, the chat room, the best way to do that is just to copy and paste it. And you can do select all if you're on a Windows PC. If you're on a Mac, you have to select the whole thing and copy and paste it into another a text file. And people are asking if the slides will be available after this. I don't think Nitesh is going to make his slides available, but we will have a recording of the entire event, and I will send everyone a link and telling you how you can access that within a day or two, or actually within a couple days after this. So that's about it. And thank you so much for this great presentation.
Thank you for having me, and thanks to everybody who joined.
And Brian's asking again about the code. It's the code is forecast, the numeral 4 and CAST, when you purchase it directly from O'Reilly in the O'Reilly U.S. shopping cart. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to close out the window now. Goodbye.